In one of his more recent books, the articulate and very interesting atheist and critic of Christianity, Christopher Hitchens, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, argues that the whole record of religion, all religion, is toward war and hatred and strife. Whether the Protestant Catholic strife of Belfast in recent decades, or Beirut between historically Christian and historically Muslim heritage, or Belgrade, or Baghdad, or Bombay, all around the world, religion poisons everything. It has to be said that there's some truth to the charge. It's not for nothing that centuries back, the 30 Years' War was in very large measure in Europe a war of religion. The reason why there's some truth to the charge is because one of the things that religion does, all religion, is transcendentalize issues. That is, it ups the ante by making the issues important. Today, the current round of dominant terrorists are from Islam. And undoubtedly, they would like to see Islamic culture in place and have a bigger share of the financial and cultural pie and influence in the world and so on. But what transcendentalizes their beliefs is their conviction that they represent the mind of God Himself. Mind you, it has also been shown by Alistair McGrath in his book on atheism that if you don't have religion to transcendentalize things, you end up transcendentalizing something else. In other words, the transcendentalizing is not merely a function of religion, it's a function of human desire to control. So in the 20th century, for example, the great movements of Nazism and Stalinism were not religiously driven movements. Sometimes in Nazism, the parties claimed a certain kind of background in Christianity. But in point of fact, what drove the two movements? Well, on the one hand, it was the transcendentalizing of the state. And on the other, it was the transcendentalizing of race and ethnicity and intrinsic Teutonic superiority. So it's not as if religion poisons everything and everything else is good. The century of the greatest bloodshed, the 20th century, was a century in which it was not religious movements that caused all of this. You don't lose 1/3 of the population of Cambodia because of Christianity, but because of communism. Where one sees that biblical Christianity is bound up with salvation by grace, however, it ought to change everything. Tim Keller in New York writes, "Belief that you are accepted by God by sheer grace is profoundly humbling. The people who are fanatics, then, are not so because they are too committed to the gospel, but because they're not committed enough." If you get just a certain kind of superficial quantity of Bible, gospel, Christian heritage, and become convinced that it's the best and everybody else must have the best too, then it's not going to be too long before you have some new crusades. in the name of Christianity. On the other hand, if you really do drink deeply from what we have been seeing the Bible is about as we work through the entire text, and see that finally our hope is in grace, not because we're stronger or better. We're never more than poor beggars telling other poor beggars where there's bread. It changes everything. Which is why biblical Christianity has always had within its heritage the capacity to challenge and reform. That's why, however ghastly and defenseless the Crusades were, it's the Christian heritage in the West that has apologized for them countless times. After all, Islam took over the Middle East first with equal bloodthirstiness. And there is no trace in the heritage of Islam of any apology for any of it. It's what they expect, because there is not built into the very structure of the heritage a similar understanding that at the end of the day, we stand or fall by grace.